Okay, well, what do we have here? So, I'm going to put all this up because I can still read music, believe it or not. And some pieces I have memorized up on my noodle, like Mozart. Mozart always wanted to have two heads. Unfortunately, he only had one. But Harry Truman only has one head. So you can imagine what is up in my head trying to get things together. So how about this one here? I always love this. The baby Jesus in the manger. Don't you like that? As you know, when I was President of the United States, I was the first of all the countries of the world to recognize Israel. I had a really good friend that fought with me in World War I. He was Hebrew. He was Jewish. We started a business after the war, which went bankrupt, unfortunately. But Harry Truman paid every dime back of $1,000 of that bankruptcy. And when I ran for the Senate in Missouri, my a Jewish friend helped support me financially. And of course, eventually I won the Senate. But in 1948, you remember what happens. 1948, after World War II, Israel wanted to declare itself a state and to be accepted by all the countries of the world. So I went along, and we were the first country, 18 minutes after Israel declared its statehood, we in the United States declared Israel as a state, as a country. And I've always told everybody from that point on, and there were a lot of people against me, but you know what I always would say to people? If it gets too hot in the kitchen, get the heck out.
Yes, right.
You know, if you don't like my stand on the Jewish state, then that's your problem, not mine. And I've always told everybody, we need to support Israel at all costs. I've always been supportive. There are three things that are very important to me. Number one, family. Family is extremely important. So don't say anything about my daughter Margaret singing. If I hear any criticism about my daughter, you're going to be a big doo-doo. I'm going to write the same letter that I wrote the New York Times when they criticized Margaret for singing. She's got a beautiful voice. So if you don't like it, get out. And I was going to go over physically and punch him in the eye, but the Secret Service would not let me. I got to the front door of the White House, but that as far as they would let me go. So I had to write a really nice letter to him. Well, that's right, you bet. So he criticized Margaret. You met? What's it? Well, I did give him hell, Harry. Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, anyways. Not only do we recognize Israel, but after we came back from World War II, I realized the importance of integrating the armed services. A lot of our African American brothers and sisters that came back from World War II were treated terrible. They couldn't find housing. Hardly anybody would hire them. It was just an absolute mess. And so finally, I gave an executive order, 9981, executive order 9981. And in that executive order, I established that all the military services, that's the Marines, the Army Air Force, the Navy, Merchant Marine Academy, all of that would no longer be segregated. And I wanted to set a precedent for down the road that all these individuals who might have a different color, they bleed the same way we bleed. They bleed red. And so I wanted to make sure that I would do that. So, how about another piece? So here we go, away we go. And Joe, did you talk to Betsy, my wife, where they're at? I think they got lost. Well, she does that sometimes. I don't know why. She disappears. So, that's okay. All right, Dawn. All right, here we go. All right, do you like Oh Holy Night?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's do a Harry Truman Oh Holy Night with a lot of runs. You like runs? Oh, holy night. So, well, let's see what else we have here. I've enjoyed retirement as an ex-president. Fortunately, when I retired from the presidency, there was no retirement. My wife and I had approximately $1,700 in our checking account. And we had to borrow money from a friend to take the train back to Missouri. And of course, there was no Secret Service protection. And well, the first thing I did when I went back to Missouri is I wanted to mow my grass. They wouldn't allow me to mow the grass at the White House. And I got out the old mower, you know, those push mowers, you know?
Oh my.
And the first thing I did is I took off my suit, got behind that old push mower, and I was mowing the grass there at the old farmhouse. Something that I missed. I did do it once. I got away from the Secret Service in the back of the White House, and I did mow the grass a little bit till they kicked me out. But you see, for all those years that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, he was in a wheelchair. okay? So the Secret Service didn't really have to exert themselves trying to protect him. I walk and run. And I'm telling you, they have to keep up with old Harry, you know. A couple weeks ago, I was in New York City, and I had a speaking engagement. And the driver was not familiar with New York. So we stopped at this house to get directions. Now, this is a true story. And so I said, I'll get out, we'll get the directions. So I get out and I knock on the door. This guy opens up the door, and he says, "What the heck? You look like that old SOB Harry Truman." And I looked back at him and I said, "I am that old SOB Harry Truman." And he slammed the door in my face. I love it. A good Republican. Nothing like a good Republican. That was really nice. But of course, all of you know the story of when I was sworn in. A sad day. FDR had passed away in Warm Springs. And they wanted to keep it a secret as long as they could. And he had a stroke. He probably died instantly. I've never really fully understood that, but I know the world will mourn FDR. But I just had closed up the Senate. Now, you know the Vice President of the United States is in charge of the Senate. He opens up and he closes in the Senate. So I had just closed the gavel, you know, Senate, just go home. And I went down in Sam, you know Sam Rayburn? He was a great Democrat. I went into his office and we had a couple of schnapps. And we were drinking some schnapps there, and I get a phone call. Well, Sam picks the phone up. It's the White House. "Harry there?" "Yeah, he's here. He has to come to the White House as soon as possible." And I'm thinking, I thought the president was in Warm Springs. And maybe he's back home now. And maybe he's telling me something that I don't know. I've only met him twice since I've been vice president. So it was very unusual that he calls me to the White House. And so they said, "You need to wait for Secret Service." And I go, "Why would Secret Service want to protect the vice president at that time?" I said, "Forget the Secret Service." So I started running through underneath, you know, the parking area of the Senate building. And I could look behind me and see about 4 or 5 men in black suits chasing me. And I jump in my car and I take off to the White House. And before long, I look back, there was like 4 or 5 SUVs following me. So I make it to the White House, go through the front door. They said, "Go through the front door, go up the steps to the second floor." That's the residence floor of the president. So I'm running up the steps, and here is Mrs. Roosevelt. And she's standing right there at the steps. And I said, "Mrs. Roosevelt, is there something wrong?" And she came up and she placed her hand on my shoulder. And she said, "Harry, the president is dead." And I'm going, whoa. "Mrs. Roosevelt, is there anything that I can do for you?" And she stood back and she smiled and said, "Is there anything that we can do for you, Harry, because you're the one in trouble now?"
Yes, sir.
Little did I know how right she was, because I was in big trouble. I had no idea about the Manhattan Project. I had no idea the situation in Europe with Germany, let alone Japan. And it was like a bombshell dropped on me. And then they said, "We've got to swear you in as soon as possible." And I said, "Well, I'm going to need a Bible." They couldn't find a Bible in the White House. They looked everywhere for a Bible.
Is that for real?
That's for real.
That's outrageous.
And so finally, one of my colleagues, I think Sam Rayburn, one of his aides, had a Bible in the desk or something. He brings up the Bible so I can swear in on the Bible. But I had my wife, my beautiful daughter that sings beautifully, Margaret, was there, Supreme Court Justice, and some colleagues in the Senate and the House, and I was sworn in as President of the United States. Afterwards, I went back to, we still were not fully in the White House as it was, but because I was vice president, I wasn't living in the White House. And so I went back to where we were, and I had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It's my favorite. And my wife looked at me and said, "Really? You're the president of the United States and you're having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?" I love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We used to have that on the farm. You folks know this, don't you? I'm a pig farmer. Okay? You realize I don't have a high school education. I mean a college education. You understand that, don't you? Never went to college. High school was the highest grade that I received an education in. And I still would love to slop pigs if I had them behind the White House, which they did during the time of Abraham Lincoln. They had a cattle deal there behind the White House. But unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to clean pigs and to feed them. So that is the true story of how I became president of the United States. I did not want to be president. I'm probably the only man in the history of the United States that did not want to be president. But when you really think about it, who wants to be president of the United States? You got to be out of your mind. And I found that out within 2 or 3 days after I took office. How about some of the old time songs from the 50s? Okay, in the 60s. I was around in the 60s. I haven't gone home yet. So let's play some of those. And we will do that. And here we go. You ready? This is based on an old Mozart tune. Okay. I can remember. Can I remember? I don't know. Remember the Toys, 1965. The Toys. What was the name of that song? They took it off of Mozart. Lover's Concerto. Remember that? Remember that one? Now, do you remember this one? This was from the 50s. So I always try to copy that off the Liberace. He just loved that, just like that, and then boom, boom. So that was the old Liberace type. So, well, as you know, my heart lies with Israel, and I like this song right here. Maybe you know it. This land is my land. Familiar with that? No one familiar with that? This land is my land? Well, you heard that one, huh? All right. This land is my land. So what it's like to be retired as president? Well, my wife and I have no pension from the government. There is no follow-up from the government when I retired. Like I said, my wife and I only had less than $2,000 in our checking account. We had to borrow money to get the train to go back to Missouri. Fortunately, I did have one of those push mowers, you know, so I didn't have to buy one of them. But we had to borrow money from Sam Rayburn, a real good friend of mine, a leader in the Democratic Party, loaned us some money so we could live on that year as I wrote my memoirs. Harper out of New York City was going to buy my memoirs for $750,000. Of that $750,000, I ended up with about $38,000 because the government took taxes out of it. So we were almost back to where we were. Fortunately, my mother had some farmland and so forth that my wife and I sold, and that helped us financially over the next few years. Maybe someday, when you leave the presidency, you'll have a nice retirement. I don't know. I hope Congress puts that into play. Howard Taft, another good president, he had the same problem I did. When he left the presidency, there was nothing. You know, remember, for Howard Taft, there's no Social Security, there was no retirement, and him and his wife really had it worse than we did when we retired. But before I have the final two songs here for Christmas, before I put all of you sound asleep, does anybody have any questions for Harry? Don't call me Mr. President, call me Harry, the old dirt farmer from Missouri. Anybody have any questions?
Was the consensus of the whole government okay to drop the bomb, or was it against you?
It was my decision. I had the final decision. Wow. You know what changed my mind? Are you familiar with the island of Okinawa?
Yes.
Okay, Okinawa was the closest island to the island of Japan. We lost 12,000 Marines at Okinawa, killed. The Japanese lost 120,000 men killed just defending a stupid island that's about 7 miles long and 4 or 5 miles wide. Now, if the Japanese were going to defend that crazy island by having over 100,000 of their soldiers die, what are they going to do in the island of Japan? They would fight for every inch. Word was coming back from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Marshall, you're familiar with General Marshall, that probably we would lose anywhere from 550 to close to 700,000 men killed taking the island of Japan. That's killed in action, in war. That does not include women and children. And we knew that the Japanese were arming women and children. So our soldiers would have to fight women and children too. Well, you know, a Marine would hesitate to shoot a little boy or girl and probably be killed before, in his hesitation. So I had to make a decision. What is that decision going to do? Am I going to save over 450,000 of our own men and women? Am I going to save Japanese men and women? Or am I going to drop the bomb and probably lose 75 to 80,000 people that would perish in the atom bomb? It was the greatest decision I had to make. And I prayed about it. I went to church. I'm a Baptist, you know. Did you know I was a Baptist? And I talked to my minister. Said, can you help me here? He said, Harry, only you can make that decision. You're president of the United States. So I went back to my office the next day. I called General Marshall and Forrest. And basically I said, go for it. You drop it, but do not drop it before, let's see, I think it was August the 7th. Because we want to drop leaflets off. So for 2 weeks, we flew over all the cities of Japan and we dropped leaflets. Please flee. Please get out. And it was in Japanese. And we said something is terrible going to happen to these cities if you do not leave. Japanese would not leave. The emperor, Hito, refused to surrender. So finally the Joint Chiefs of Staff called me and says, it's after August the 7th. Do we have a go? And I said, you have a go. And of course, I think you know the rest of it. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we did drop the bomb. We had a third one, and we were ready to drop the third bomb on Tokyo. Fortunately, the Japanese surrendered. Now, we were also in the mix of making a fourth atom bomb. So by the time the Japanese surrendered, we still had 2 atom bombs left in our arsenal, but I did not want to use them. Fortunately for the Germans, the idiot Adolf Hitler, well, he didn't surrender, he committed suicide, and that was an act of God. And then, of course, Germany surrendered, so we did not have to use the bomb on Germany. But I was willing to drop the bomb on Germany, on Berlin. We have to stop that. We have to stop fascism and Nazism and imperialism. And so I feel like I made the right decision. And I've had people come up to me, sir, speaking like I am, and they'll come up and a couple of the veterans will give me a kiss on the cheek and said, Harry, you saved my life. Harry, you saved my life. And I did, because he probably would have died taking the island of Japan. Other questions for Harry? Don't call me president. Call me Harry.
Harry,
Yes.
tell us about your trip back to Washington the next year in your car.
When Bess and I drove all the way.
Yeah.
Refresh my mind on that there, Counselor.
But you and Bess drove back to Washington D.C. in your car, and you thought you could get through there without being noticed.
Oh.
And you didn't get too far into some of the big roads, so people were staring and stopping, and you had I don't think you did it again.
No, and we had no protection. You understand that. Once you leave the presidency, there's no Secret Service back then. No Secret Service protection, and he's refreshed my mind. There was one soldier that was standing along the road, and I think he was in the same division I was in the War of 1917, and we stopped at a light, and he went like this. He saluted.
Oh, wow.
And Bess was driving. I was tired. That's a long ways from Missouri. And I'm looking out the window and I returned the salute. And then as we pulled away, he goes, "Give him hell, Harry." The military loved me. Number one, I was a veteran. But number two, the The secret that I feel is if you're president of the United States, you need to be of the people.
Yes, sir.
You need to be of the people. And the people of the United States need to know you care about them individually. In nursing homes, in hospitals, in schools, okay, in everyday life, the people need to know you care. You care about them. You care about Medicare or Medicaid. You care about Social Security, which we had because of President Roosevelt. You care about these things, and you want to preserve them, and you want to help all that you can. And if people see that in you, even though you're a dirt pig farmer, they will vote for you. And you remember what happened in my last election? Counselor, what happened? The second time I ran, well, the only time I ran. What did the newspaper say?
You lost.
I lost. Who beat me? Dewey. Dewey defeats Truman. It made front page, and I still love that time I picked up that paper and I held it up after I was elected, of course. Dewey defeats Truman. And here again, the people knew my heart. And if they know your heart, if they know you're sincere, they'll vote for you. And I have nothing against Republicans. There are some good Republicans, very few, but there are some. And like my PR man, Joe, he's a good Republican, okay? But they're really, really good Democrats, like my counselor, Joe Mason, who is a really good Democrat. And you see, my key, you've heard about the Marshall Plan, and you knew about the Berlin airlift, and you knew about the Truman Doctrine. That was bipartisan. All that was bipartisan. And I worked with Republicans, and Republicans worked with me. And we got the Berlin airlift. You know, Russia wasn't going to allow us to cross the road, so we flew over their heads and dropped groceries to Berlin. But what about the Marshall Plan? Bipartisan. What about the Truman Plan? Bipartisan. We all came together. We didn't fight one another. Now I know they did that back in the 1820s. They were beating one another over with canes and so forth, you know. There were a couple duels. You know what a duel is. Can you name a famous one? Alexander Hamilton, who else? Aaron Burr, Vice President of the United States, shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. But we didn't have any of that when I was president. We got along with the Republicans. They got along with us to some degree. But we felt like we needed to stop communism, and the only way to do that is to rebuild Europe. And that's what we did with the Truman Plan and the Marshall Plan. And we rebuilt Germany, as we should have. Other questions anybody would have for Harry?
Me.
Yes.
Hey, Harry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
You go ahead. Then I'll call on this young lady. Go ahead.
Years ago, I met a gentleman who was a retired Secret Service agent on the presidential detail.
Okay.
He had a lot to say about you, attempting to get away from the Secret Service, which I always thought he was kind of pulling my leg, but it kind of doesn't sound like he was.
Oh no, Secret Service did not like me. When I could sneak out I'd sneak out the back door. They would have to place Secret Service agents on the back, well, all the doors, because they never knew what door I was coming out of.
That's what he said.
And if I could get out, I'd walk up and down the streets. One time I did make it out, and alluding to the fact when Bess and I drove from Missouri, I took a walk down Constitutional Avenue. I had no guards or anything. People came, you know, it was late at night, almost early morning. Nobody was out. But that kind of startled everybody. Here comes Harry Truman, but that is correct. They did not like, and they couldn't keep up with me walking. So a lot of them had to go into training to run so they could keep up with me. So remember, before that they were guarding FDR in a wheelchair. That was big, that was difference. Yes, honey.
Yes, I heard that Mrs. Truman
Bess?
did help you with a lot of your decisions. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Bess and I were very close. I am a family man. I believe in the family. I believe in one wife, okay? And marriage is forever. And I believe in the family, the children, and I support my wife and my daughter, Margaret. And that's when that writer, after Margaret had a concert, he said that this was the worst singing he had ever heard. And I was already, like I said, I was heading out the back door. I was going over to his office, and I was going to punch him in the face, and I would have. But the Secret Service says you can't do that, so I wrote a nasty letter. But yeah, that's true. I'm a family-oriented man. You know. Other questions? Did I answer your question, honey? Yes.
In general scenario, what kinds of cars were you used to seeing, and what was the fashion like back then?
You mean as far as dress?
Yeah.
Of course, as you see me dressed, even though I'm no longer president, everybody wore white shirts, ties. All the men dressed up. They had hats were really in. When we would eat, even before I was president, when I was in the Senate, we would sit down at the table as a family. Myself, Bess, and my daughter Margaret. I would have a suit and a white shirt and a black tie. This isn't black, but this is how we dressed. Cars, I liked Oldsmobiles and Studebakers. And an Oldsmobile probably was my number one car, and then of course the Studebaker. But as you know, for about 5 years I could not drive. They would not, although I did sneak out again, and I didn't make it out the gate. So as soon as the Secret Service realized I was in a car heading out the gate, they closed the gate and they wouldn't let me out. And I got really mad. I jumped out of the car and I said, "I'm President of the United States." And they said, "No, you're Harry. Get back in the house." That's a true story. So you see, I wanted to be with the people. I wanted to be with the people. I would have no problem in coming into a facility like this and talking to all of you. And I would keep the Secret Service out. And I would just talk to you one-on-one, one-on-one. And I think some of the better presidents of the United States did that. Abraham Lincoln was a person people. He was smart. I'm not smart. I'm not as smart as Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or Andrew Jackson. Some of these great presidents. Some were Republican, some were Democrats. Okay? Although Washington was a Whig. They had Federalists and Whigs back then. Any other questions I can help you with?
What was your relationship with President Kennedy?
At first, I thought that Kennedy was a young whippersnapper, still wet behind the ears, probably would not go too far. After the Bay of Pigs invasion, and then after I realized that we were DEFCON 2 going to war with Russia in 1963, we were this close to nuclear war. I saw how he met with General Eisenhower, or retired Eisenhower, down at the fort there outside of Washington. And Eisenhower and Kennedy spoke for 3-4 days. He was seeking guidance on how to handle Khrushchev, if you remember Khrushchev. Khrushchev's ships were heading toward Cuba. What was on those ships? Intercontinental ballistic missiles tipped with warheads, nuclear warheads. Kennedy had, he was facing a greater task than I was with the atom bomb, because that, if Kennedy would have allowed that, you and I probably would not be here today. So I gave him credit, Joe. After the Bay of Pigs, which he messed up, okay, he was young, but that was more of the CIA and the NSA. After the deal with Khrushchev blinked. He turned the ships around and he went back. And I give Kennedy credit. By the way, even though I didn't care for General Eisenhower, I didn't think that he was the brightest star in the sky. But at the Kennedy funeral, both Eisenhower and myself rode together to Arlington Hill for the burial, John F. Kennedy. We sort of made up a little bit. But Eisenhower was not as stupid as you know who, Dugout Doug. Dugout, what a disaster. He wore that stupid, I call it a scrambled egg hat, Douglas MacArthur. He abandoned his troops, got on a ship. He didn't get on a submarine, thank goodness. And him and his wife and son took off. He should have stayed right there with his troops at Manila, but he did not do it. But I give credit to Eisenhower more so than Dugout Doug. Other questions? And I had to meet the guy on Wake Island. That was a trip. Yes.
Did you, running the presidency, what was it like doing so? Did you have a lot of meetings?
Meetings?
Yeah.
I hate meetings. I hate them. What we basically did is we had, I call them sessions, where we'd have coffee and bring in donuts and so forth. We sit around. You have to realize, being a pig dirt farmer, the only experience I had in politics up to the time I was president was in the Senate. Of course, yes, I ran the Senate because I was vice president, but that's not the presidency. I had a lot to learn, and I'll be the first person. Thanks for coming, honey. Vote for me, would you, please?
Sure.
I noticed that I like Ike button on you.
She is my neighbor, my 101-year-old friend.
Oh, she's precious.
Yeah, she
She
is.
gave me a dirty look, but that's all right.
No.
So what were we talking about before I had a senior moment?
Meetings?
Uh,
You ran?
Yeah, we just had coffee sessions, and I would have to consult with the brightest of the area because I was not experienced in foreign relations. I had to learn in relationship to the Truman Doctrine and then the Marshall Plan. I had a lot of help on that. Most presidents have advisors and help. Okay, not all presidents can be Thomas Jefferson. You understand? Thomas Jefferson used to go out from Monticello and gaze up at contemplating the universe. I mean, the guy could speak Greek, Hebrew, French, German, English. He knew astronomy. He knew science. Okay, great. He was an architect. He designed Monticello, and he designed the University of Virginia. The guy was a genius. And I can remember when Kennedy called upon all the intellectuals to come to the White House. They were discussing something in relationship to NASA. He looked out over the crowd and he said, "There has not been this much intellectual in the White House since Thomas Jefferson was here in the White House." You know, and Thomas Jefferson was one of the best presidents. It's always better to come late than not at all.
We didn't know where you were.
I know. Well, I sent out Secret Service to find you, and you know, you will hear two pieces on the piano. This is a lot better piano than over next door. So you got a nice piano here. Okay, we're on a roll. Who else has questions for Harry? Yes, sir.
What was your salary at the time?
What was my salary at the time? I do not know. I think it was $35,000 a year, but don't quote me on that. That was a lot of money, but yeah. But you have to remember, when my wife and I left the White House, what we had. Okay, we had to foot the bill for our food. You understand that?
We did.
Any food that we'd bring into the White House. Now, when President Hayes was in the White House, he was a teetotaler. So they took all the booze and everything and threw it out. Okay, and I really don't drink that much. A little bit with Sam Rayburn and some of my colleagues in the Senate, but I would say around 35,000. Okay, Google it. Okay, next question. Do you know what Google is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You know what Google is?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, these are great questions all of you are having. So let's have some more questions. We have a few more. Come on. Other questions anybody would have?
There's no question, but one more senior moment, and we're gonna keep you.
You're gonna keep me? Well, I am so old, honey, that when I go into an antique shop, they want to keep me.
How did you meet your wife?
What's this?
How did you meet your wife?
Beth, we met before I went to war. We were childhood sweethearts. Her mom and dad hated me, and she came from a family of wealth. They had lots of money. I'm a dirt pig farmer. You know, I spent my whole life. High school education, that was it. And we started seeing one another before I went overseas in 1917. And the father came to me one day and had what Franklin Delano Roosevelt would call a fireside chat. And we sat down to the fireside chat, and basically he realized that his daughter was deeply in love with me. What is there not to love about me? Oh, fuzzy Harry. And so we got married, which a lot of soldiers going overseas would not get married before they left, but we did. And God was with me, and I came back. A lot of my friends did not come back. From World War I was terrible. It was the war to end wars. Millions died. 32,000 Frenchmen died in one day at the Argonne. 32,000 killed. So one day, it was worse than Antietam, the Battle of Antietam during the Civil War. So I was very fortunate to come home, and we had one daughter, Margaret, who is a great singer. And what do you not want to do with my daughter when she sings? You do not want to criticize her, do you?
I wanna hear her.
So, did I answer your question? We were childhood sweethearts, but I had a little trouble with the parents. Other questions anybody would have? These are good questions.
So when you come out of character, how did you meet your wife?
I don't understand. Counselor Joe, do you understand that question? When I come out of character, how did I meet my wife?
In your real life, how did you meet your wife?
In my real
I think
life,
that's what she means.
my wife fell in love with a 4-star general.
Okay.
4-star general. Am I correct on that?
Yep.
Okay. So much for that.
And you got down on your knees and begged her to marry you?
I did, but it was in Gettysburg.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so let's play 2 more pieces, okay?
Wait,
And
Joe has a question.
Joe,
How did you get along with your mother-in-law in the White House?
somebody always has to ask that question, like you know, what about Eisenhower's Jeep driver, Kay Summersby? So, she stayed at her level there in the White House, and we stayed at our level. So it has 3 levels. As long as she didn't come down to our level, things were pretty cool. She resented me till the day she died because she felt like even as President of the United States, I was not worthy for her daughter because she always called me the pig farmer.
Oh, my.
I don't know why,
My.
but you know, Harry the pig farmer. Did I answer your question?
That answers it.
Yeah, we were on speaking terms. Yeah, we were on speaking terms. Other questions anybody would have? Well, I'll step out of character before I do 2 more pieces. And let's see, probably Harry Truman, as far as I teach American history, Western Civ, world history, U.S. government and American history at Genesis Christian Academy. So if you ever want to support that, let me know. It's here in town, Genesis Christian Academy. It's a private school. And we were going over some presidents last week in Constitution. And as far as I'm concerned, Harry Truman is one of our better presidents. And I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, but I did campaign for John F. Kennedy in 1961. And that's the time that I met John F. Kennedy. Of course, I was in love with Jackie Kennedy, so what can you do? You know? I mean, I'm standing in my front yard, and here comes John F. Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy down the road right by me, you know. So, but I would say Harry Truman is the #1 president. I think he was a great president because he was not a full politician, and he understood you and I. He was a common man. Language is a little rough. I held back today. His language is a little rough, but he was a great president. We probably had 3 good ones. George Washington, obviously, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and believe it or not, I'm a Ronald Reagan man. and Ronald Reagan. So those are some of your better presidents, okay? And I push that in school. You don't want to be my student. Diane, what do my students have to do before class starts?
Read the Constitution, say the pledge, have a prayer.
They have to say the Pledge of Allegiance every class. They have to read excerpts from the Declaration of Independence. They have to read excerpts from the United States Constitution.
That's good.
Okay? And then we have prayer, and then I give them permission to sit down. They don't sit down, I give them permission. Then they sit down.
Obviously, you do not teach in the
We
public
should do that
school.
more.
Obviously, I did teach in the public school, but I got out.
Yeah.
Why did I get out, Diane?
It was pretty bad.
The principal would call me all the time, Mr. Hammontree, you can't do that in public school. Oh, really? I just did. So, okay, let's play. Here we go. Diane, this sounds a lot better.
Whereabouts in New
Take off my
Jersey?
glasses.
My husband is from New Jersey.
Okay, here we go. What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Let's see. Forget O Holy Night. All right, so we'll finish up with What Child Is This? I will change keys. I love changing keys. And then Silent Night. And here we go. Changing keys. All of you are awake?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to tell
Thank
you
you very
one
much.
thing. My-
Yes, you're welcome.
Wonderful.
My mother-in-law was a member with the DAR, and she knows that John F. Kennedy was married before he married Jackie.
Well, I thought that Jackie was, I didn't know that, so.
A lot of people don't, but a lot of people were killed that knew it.
Yeah, no, I was not aware of that. Okay, so,
That's a true fact.
so now I'm gonna do what I do in my class. You are dismissed.
Thank you.